Hey, what's happening, y'all? It's me coming back at you again with another vid. Well, this video is long overdue. Today, or tonight, I should say, I'm going to present my case, and I'm going to do a resume matchup between Ray Leonard versus Ezzard Charles. Now, the question is, who's greater between the two? Now, for us modern day boxing fans, we all are very familiar with Ray Leonard's career because many of us have watched his fights. We've watched what he can do in the ring and the level of opposition that he's fought. So, yeah, he's beaten some Hall of Famers. He's been involved in some Hall of Fame fights. He's been in some memorable fights. However, what plagued Leonard's career was his lack of longevity, his lack of being consistent with his career, where one of those inconsistencies and lack of longevity points to the fact that he's retired 4 times and whatnot. But let's lay down the list of Sugar Ray Leonard's career in detail. Okay, first things first, he had an amateur record 145-5 overall, won 2 separate world amateur championships at light welterweight, a amateur championship at lightweight, won gold at the 1974 and 1975 North American Championships. That's amateur championships, and won gold at the Pan Am Games in 1975, and then won the Olympic gold medal at the 1996 Olympic Games as a light welterweight. Now, from there, he turned pro in 1977, I believe. His first fight was against Luis Vega, which resulted into a decision. And then after that, he fought Willie Rodriguez. Then after that, Vinny De Barrios, Frank Sartori, Augustine Estrada, Hector Diaz, Rocky Ramon, Art McKnight, Javier Munoz, Bobby Heyman, Randy Milton, Rafael Rodriguez, Dickie Eklund, and Floyd Mayweather Sr. This is interesting. Now, we all know who Floyd Mayweather Sr. is. Floyd Mayweather Sr., we all know he's a great trainer. He's a Hall of Fame trainer, I believe. He's trained many great champions. More famously, Oscar De La Hoya and his son Floyd Mayweather Jr. whatnot, and has trained the likes of Mickey Bay as well, and Ricky Hatton to one point. But needless to say, Floyd Mayweather Sr. was never a great fighter, or never a good fighter by that matter. He had some skills, but if you look at that Leonard fight, that was a total mismatch, and Leonard just walked through every punch that he threw because Senior was never a great puncher, so it is what it is. So he moves on to face Randy Shields, Bernardo Prada, Armando Nunez, Johnny Gant, Fernando Marcotte. Now, this is a very interesting note here. Now, Fernando Marcotte, if you look at his record, his record was, I think it was 44-3, I think. Hold on. No. He was 48-3, okay, when Leonard fought him. And you look at that, you just wonder, that's a great record. Why? Leonard's fighting him in his 19th pro fight. But if you look at his resume, the guy has had over, he's fought men with 28 losing records. Wow. And the next guy before that was Daniel Aldo Gonzalez. Now, Gonzalez himself had a record for 52-2-4 before Leonard fought him in the 20th pro fight. And he's also fought 28 men with losing records. Wow. Then after that, Leonard fights an individual by the name of Aldulfo Forat. And then he also fights Marcos Theodoro, who also fought 26 men with losing records. Then after that, he defeats Tony Chavarani. Then he defeats Pete Ranazani to capture the NABF regional welterweight title. And he defeated Andy Price in his first defense. Interesting enough, Andy Price, though he wasn't really a great fighter, but he did have skill. He did have some skill. He was able to defeat Pepino Cuevas, who's a champion Hall of Famer. So you could say that was one, probably first legitimate win for Leonard. Then after the Andy Price fight, and I think that fight was for the #1 contendership for the Wilfred Benitez's welterweight title. So after he defeats Price, he enters his 26 pro fight against a 2-division champion at that time, Wilfred Benitez. And Benitez, he stopped him, I think it was in the 8th round or something like that, I have to check. And Benitez is a 3-division world champion, Hall of Famer. He defeated the likes of Roberto Duran and Carlos Palmeiro. Then in his first defense, he defeats Dave Green. Second defense, he loses to Roberto Duran in one of the best welterweight fights I've ever seen. I mean, that fight was a total war. I mean, Jesus. I mean, I don't know how those guys were left standing after that fight because they were trading bombs. And Leonard decided, not usually his style fight. He decided he can go toe to toe with Duran. Given the fact that Duran was coming up 2 weight classes to fight him, becoming, I think he was the only champion at that time who was able to do it, pull it off. I believe. No, I'm wrong. I could be wrong. No, I think Duran was the first guy to do it. So Duran was able to succeed in a very, very close fight in the 15-round war in 1980. Duran, we all know, has a very illustrious career. At the time, he was 70-1. He had, he went on to become a 4th division champion. He went on to defeat the likes of Iran Barkley and Davey Moore, whatnot. And Davey Moore, if you look at that fight, that was a ferocious. He destroyed Davey Moore with those ferocious body shots. And we all know that Duran's is a killer in the inside fighting game. So, Davey Moore, God rest his soul, he wasn't quite the same fighter after that destruction by Duran. So he gets a rematch against Duran. In a very bizarre fashion, Leonard recaptured the title. We all know that infamous no mas, which is translated in English from Latin, no more. Duran quit in that fight, and he got ridiculed to the point that his home country in Panama was so ashamed of him to the point that they refused to even advertise him for 2-3 years because of that humiliating defeat, I should say. And people, actually had Duran up winning that fight slightly, and for him to quit like that, that was very bizarre. I guess due to the fact that Leonard wasn't fighting this fight, he was, boxing more. He was moving, getting out of the way. He didn't want to stand toe-to-toe. Duran didn't even give him a chance to throw his shots. So that's what frustrated him. And plus, Duran had some weight issues going into that fight as well. So, hey, it is a win on Leonard's resume. It is what it is. It's a good win. Then he makes his first defense against Larry Bonds. And then he moves up to light middleweight in his second, and then fights Ali Khalid and captured the light middleweight title, but he never defended that title. And Khalid himself wasn't really a great fighter. His only great win on his resume was against Sambu Kalambe. But other than that, he was never a great fighter. So Leonard wins the light middleweight title. He never defended it. So we move on. He fights Thomas Hearns in the second defense, and Thomas Hearns was the favorite. And then Thomas Hearns was 32-0 with 30 knockouts, a devastating puncher at welterweight. And many people didn't give Ray Leonard much of a chance to win this fight. So he had to, he took Hearns to 14 rounds where Hearns wasn't really used to. And knowing that he couldn't really outbox him, he had to, take the fight to Hearns and slug it out with him, pressure him, and keep him away from the center of the ring and trap him to the corners. That's exactly what he did. And he got Hearns out to become the unified, undisputed welterweight champion of the world. And Hearns himself, we all know, became the first 5-division champion, Hall of Famer. Went on to have Hall of Fame fights after the Leonard loss. Being, at the time one of the few guys to knock out Roberto Duran. In a very surprising fashion, which earned, I think, Hearns a shot at Marvin Hagler at that point. But it is what it is there. So. Hearns, we all know about Tommy Hearns' record. He was the first guy to beat Virgil Hill, who Sugar Ray Leonard ducked, by the way, to light heavyweight. He went on to beat Pepino Cuevas, Wilfred Benitez for the light welterweight, the light middleweight, so forth. So, but his kryptonite was Iran Barkley. Anyhow, Leonard moved on to fight Bruce Finch in his third defense. And then he retired due to a detached retina. And he was supposed to defend his undisputed title against Aaron Pryor. And, of course, had to retire due to that detached retina. And that left Pryor in shambles, which I'll get to later in the presentation. So he makes a comeback fight after a 2-year layoff, 2-year retirement to fight Kevin Howard. He didn't look too great in that fight because Kevin Howard, a journeyman, dropped Leonard in the 5th round, I think. And I think Marvin Hagler was in attendance for that fight, and Marvin Hagler was laughing in the audience after that knockdown. I believe that's what it was. So it is what it is. I'll try to catch up with the presentation as soon as I can, but I'm gonna go forward with this. So Leonard takes a 3-year layoff. Then he comes back and fights Marvin Hagler. Finally, a fight that everyone was waiting for after 5 years. And Leonard, to his own admission, when he was asked why did he wait this long to take the fight with Hagler, he even to his own admission said that after seeing the Mugabe fight, he noticed that Hagler has slowed down to where it was a perfect time to fight him. So he pretty much had admitted that he'd been waiting this whole time to fight Hagler, waiting for the opportunity for him to slow down while he was not pretty much at his best. And I thought Hagler still had, somewhat left in him in a way, but he went through some wars. His wars with Mugabe, his wars with Hearns, his wars with Juan Rodon, God rest his soul, with his a tough fight with Roberto Duran 4 years prior. So yeah, he was in some tough fights, so forth. But anyhow, he beats Hagler in a very controversial, most disputed, I should say, one of the most disputed decisions in boxing history. I still give Leonard. I thought he won the fight because I felt that Hagler gave away a few rounds, but it is what it is. So I'm going to catch up before this presentation gets to Ezzard Charles, but I'm going to go ahead and keep going here. So he goes on to, he didn't defend the middleweight title or the linear middleweight title, whatnot, after he defeated Hagler. So he goes on and fights Donnie Lalonde. And, oh, Lord Jesus Christ. To me, why did this even happen? Because Lalonde was a light heavyweight champion, the WBC light heavyweight champion. Okay. And he wasn't a great fighter, number one. Number two, Sugar Ray Leonard had lured Lalonde to come down to super middleweight, which at the time was a pretty new division, which they didn't, where all the belts weren't really sanctioned there until the only belt that needed to be sanctioned left was the WBC. The WBA and the IBF have already created super middleweight titles years prior before the Lalonde fight. But up to this point, they created the WBC super middleweight title. And in this situation, Leonard had lured Lalonde to come down to 168, not only fight for the super middleweight title, but also put up the light heavyweight title on the line. And Gil Clancy at the time, from my understanding, was not happy about that at all. It criticized that fight. So anyhow, so it went on, and Leonard won the fight, capturing both the super middleweight and light heavyweight title. We all know that Lalonde had put him down, but interesting enough, though, Lalonde has said that the reason why he came in at 166 is he weighed in 166 because according to a certain clause in the contract between him and Leonard is that if he came over a pound over the weight limit of 168, he would have to forfeit $1 million out of his purse per pound. So he was really working hard to get down to 168. So because he was getting his big payday, he would be damned if he was going to let that ever happen, to lose $1 million per pound if he came overweight. But it is what it is. But Leonard never defended the light heavyweight title. He vacated while you had guys like Williams and Virgil Hill who's calling him out. So it is what it is. So then he takes a catchweight fight at super middleweight against Thomas Hearns. That turned out to be a very great fight of the year. He drew with Hearns in that fight. Many people felt that Hearns deserved the decision. I thought Hearns won that fight as well. And Leonard had even years later had admitted that Tommy Hearns should have won that fight. So it is what it is. Then he fights Roberto Duran in a senseless rematch that nobody wanted to see, and that turned out to be a pretty dreadful fight. And second defense at super middleweight title. So then he didn't fight in 1990. Then he comes back and actually goes down to light middleweight and fights Terry Norris for the 154 title. Now, interesting enough, Terry Norris became champion after he knocked out John Mugabe. Now, according to Julian Jackson, and according to Leonard himself, Leonard said that he would fight the winner between Terry Norris and Julian Jackson for the title. And when Julian Jackson knocked out Terry Norris, Leonard didn't fight him. Wow. But when Terry Norris became the champion by defeating Mugabe, he decided to go ahead and go after Norris. Why? Because Norris was known to be very, very vulnerable with punch resistance. He didn't have one of the greatest chins in history, but he was definitely an excellent fighter despite those deficiencies. But needless to say, Leonard went in as a favorite. He got destroyed by Norris, got completely shut out in that fight, and he retired after that. So 4 years later, he comes back. He fights Hector Camacho, and which in my opinion, I think it was a money fight, and he got stopped by Camacho in humiliating fashion in 6 rounds. His first knockout loss in his career. And Camacho himself became a 2-division Hall of Famer champion himself, like Terry Norris, Hall of Fame champion. So, final career stats. We already looked at his amateur record. I don't need to read that again. I know Ezzard Charles came up already, but I'm going to catch up with you guys. So, pro career, 36-3-1, involved in 8 Hall of Fame fights. Only 4 wins in those Hall of Fame fights. Defeated 6 world champions, Benitez, Duran, Ernst, Kalu, Hagler, and Delon out of 40 pro fights. Defeated 4 Hall of Famers in Benitez, Duran, Hearns, and Hagler. 10 wins in title pro fights, 14 Hall of Fame. So which is a combination of 14 wins in Hall of Fame in total fights combined, on title fights combined, 5 successful title defenses, 2 linear titles, never defended the linear middleweight title, or he actually never defended the light middleweight title. Actually, no, I'm sorry, he didn't win the linear title. He won the linear middleweight title, never defended it, I should say. Never defended the light middleweight title, never defended the middleweight title, and never defended the light heavyweight title. But in the process, he didn't fight guys like Donald Curry, which he completely avoided, Milt McCory, Mike McCallum, Frank Tate, Michael Nunn, and yes, people were asking for that fight to be made against him and Michael Nunn. Leonard was offered to fight a lucrative amount of money to take that fight against Nunn, and he rejected it. Iran Barkley, Sambu Kalambe, Marlon Starling at welterweight, Julian Jackson, which I already told you, Julian Jackson and Terry Norris, when that fight went down, Leonard said himself he was going to take the winner of that fight, but he elected, after Julian Jackson had knocked him out, Norris, he decided to go after Norris instead. Leslie Stewart, who was the WBA light heavyweight champion at that time. Charles Williams, who was running his mouth off and he was calling everybody out. And, of course, Virgil Hill. All right. Moving along to Ezzard Charles, the Cincinnati Cobra. Ezzard Charles had an amateur career of 42-0, and he started his career as a featherweight. Wow. And he won 4 separate world welterweight amateur titles and 3 separate world middleweight amateur titles. Then after his amateur career concluded, for someone to ask you why didn't he participate in the Olympics, I due to the fact that he was drafted to go to serve in the Second World War. So that kind of put his boxing career to halt. But after the war concluded, he resumed his career and he made his pro debut against Melody Johnson, whatnot. And then after that, he takes on John Reeves in this fight. Then after the John Reeves fight, he fights on Remo Fernandez, Charlie Banks, and fights Charlie Banks in a rematch. And mind you, these are all middleweight fights. Started his career at middleweight. And he fights Frankie Williams, Kid Cash, Carl Turner, John Reeves, Billy Hood, Marty Simmons, Charlie Jerome, Billy Bengal, and then he fights Salkan Garaf, Floyd Howard, Joe Suka, Rudy Solank. And his 18th pro fight, he goes up against world champion Hall of Famer. Actually, it wasn't for the title. He actually fought a Hall of Famer. This is a Hall of Fame fight, and this is against Ken Overland. Okay. In this particular fight, he lost by unanimous decision. But based off my understanding, Overland, this is a very, very close fight from my understanding, and it could have gone both ways. And Overland squeaked out the decision over Charles. And Charles, this is a guy who's a world champion Hall of Famer as well. And after the Overland fight, he fights Al Gilbert. Then he fights Pat Mangani. And then he wins against Teddy Yarsray, who also he defeated as an amateur and who became a Hall of Famer world champion as well. So in his first 21 pro fights, Ezzard Charles defeated 2 Hall of Famers and world champions, even though he did become a champion in the weight class at middleweight. And then after that, he fights another world champion, Anton Crostorati. And Crostorati himself, even though he hasn't yet to be admitted to the Hall of Fame, but he's also had some Hall of Fame fights as well. He's defeated guys like Vince Dundee, who's a solid contender, Lloyd Marshall, who was a Black Murderers Row member who never became world champion, but is a Hall of Famer. He defeated Archie Moore. Wow. Hall of Famer champ. We all know Archie Moore. He also defeated Ken Overland that Ezzard Charles couldn't beat. Billy Conn, champion Hall of Famer. He defeated Lou Barral, champion Hall of Famer. George Abrams, Hall of Famer. He defeated Babe Risco, who's a former world champion. Very good fighter. And he also defeated Pete Lawson, who's a world champion. So, wow. Yes. So this is Teddy Roscoe. Actually, you know what? I read it wrong. Anton Carrasco. Teddy Roscoe actually defeated those guys. He defeated Lloyd Marshall and Vince Dundee and Archie Moore Sanford. So that's the reason why he's a Hall of Famer. Now, as far as Christiani, he defeated Millennial Batani, who's a champion Hall of Famer, Jimmy Bivens of Black Murder's Roll members, and also Severino Garcia, champion Hall of Famer. Now, if you guys don't know who Severino Garcia is, Severino Garcia I think he was the first Filipino world champion in history. So he's one. He was a world champion, and he had a very good illustrious career. Got him to the Hall of Fame. So after the Ferrati's fight, I can't pronounce his name. He rematches with Ken Overland, and this fight came to a draw. Now, many people felt that Ezzard Charles was deserving of that decision, but all know back in the day, boxing, was very, very mob control. So politics definitely played a role here in that fight being called a draw. Then after that, he moves on to face Billy Pryor. And then he loses to Ken Ternino, who also defeated Anton Castillo, and Homer Williams, a Hall of Famer who's a Black Murderers Row member as well. A guy that who's ferociously dangerous, as a big power puncher, completely avoided by everybody. Then after that, he faces perhaps the greatest fighter of all time who hasn't won a world title, who is the greatest fighter out of the Black Murderers Row members, which I don't really disagree with, because Ezzard Charles himself was a Black Murderers Row member, if you ask me. The great Charlie Burley. Yes, the great Charlie Burley, who never got knocked out in his career, who was very skilled, who can parry punches, who can avoid punches. Even if you throw him at great accuracy, Charlie Burley can avoid them. Okay? He defeated Charlie Burley to become the number one middleweight contender. And Charlie Burley, who did he beat? He beat Archie Moore. He beat Homer Williams, Hall of Famer, which I already mentioned. Aaron Wade, Black Murderers Row member. Jack Chase, Black Murderers Row member. Oakland Billy Smith, who was a solid contender, who defeated Harold Johnson, a Hall of Famer, who also defeated Burt Lydell, a Black Murderers Row member, and defeated Coco Kid, Hall of Famer. And then he rematched with Burley, and he won in this particular fight. He hurt Burley with a right cross. I think it was a right hook in the 5th round. And when he hurt Burley was very defensive after that. He didn't throw that many punches. He was very, very cautious, because Charles himself was a very, very, very good power puncher as well. But he was more known for his skills and his accuracy and his ability to throw the jab at a distance and follow up with the right cross, with a double left jab with the right cross. So after the Burley fight, he was supposed to face Tony Zale, who was the middleweight champion at the time. And for some reason, Tony Zale had frozen out Ezzard Charles. He didn't give him a shot whatsoever. And Tony Zale himself didn't, as great as he was, as one of the greatest middleweights of all time, he didn't fight any of the Black Murderers Row members either. He's had good fights with, a trilogies with Rocky Graziano, who himself was a former middleweight champion, Hall of Famer, who's had battles with Sugar Ray Robinson and so forth. And so Zale froze out. He froze out Ezzard Charles, and particularly, when a fighter gets frozen out like that in the division back in those days, the only option left to do is that if you really wanted to get a world title shot, you have to go up in weight, and that's exactly what Ezzard did. So, given the fact that he didn't get that shot against Tony Zale, he moves up the weight. He makes his light heavyweight debut against Steve Makus. Okay? In Makus, he won that fight by KO in the 1st round, destroyed him. And then he moves up to fight Booker Beckwith, destroyed him as well. Very good fight. And okay. And then he takes a fight with Jose Bazario, defeats him. Then Moise Brown. And then in his 32nd pro fight, he fights Joey Maxim. Well, we all know Joey Maxim famously defeated Sugar Ray Robinson, even though in the situation, Joey Maxim was losing that fight unanimously until, Robinson had retired in his corner due to heat exhaustion. And Maxim himself is a world champion Hall of Famer who defeated the likes of just Robinson. Who did he also beat here, too? He also beat... I'm trying to catch up with my slide here, everyone. Joey Maxim also defeated Freddie Mills, who was a former world champion, who defeated Gus Lamovich, who, by the way, was a light heavyweight champion, who ducked Ezzard Charles. And Lamovich was offered a big some amount of dollars to take the fight with Ezzard Charles at light heavyweight, and he was offered 50 grand to take that fight, which had been a very big payday, largest payday of his career at that time. But Lavovich said no. He said that belts are more important than fighting dangerous opposition, to something to those lines, which I don't know, man. Jesus Christ. So he defeats Joey Maxim. He rematches with Maxim, defeats him again. He loses to Jimmy Bivens, which is no hard feelings. Jimmy Bivens is a Hall of Famer. He defeated the likes of Archie Moore. He defeated Gus Lavanovich. He defeated Terry Yaris, Molino Batan, and Anton Krosby, and he also defeated Joey Maxim. So Jimmy Bivens himself was a very ferocious power punching heavyweight too. And by the way, and a lot of people felt that Joe Louis was completely avoiding Jimmy Bivens at one point, avoiding him like crazy. And obviously, Jimmy Bivens, I would say, is also Black Murderers Row member as well. And Joe Louis, obviously, he did ultimately take a fight with him, and he did beat Jimmy Bivens in a very tough fight. Then after that, he fights Lloyd Marshall, a Hall of Famer, Black Murderers Row member, who defeated the great Jake LaMotta, which many people call as one of the, some would say is one of the greatest probably the greatest middleweight of all time, but I would say he's one of the greatest middleweights of all time. Jack Chase, Black Murderers Row member. He also defeated Charlie Burley. He also defeated Ted Yarbries. He also defeated Kid Overland, whatnot. Then after the Lloyd Marshall fight, he fights Stanley Coyce, Aldo Barlow, Al Sheridan, Billy Duncan, George Parks, Tommy Hubert, and then he goes on and defeats Archie Moore. Archie Moore, the universally recognized the greatest light heavyweight of all time. Now, Archie Moore has the most knockouts in history. I think he has 132 knockouts out of 186 wins in his career. Archie Moore defeated Bobo Olsen, who also had great fights with Sugar Ray Robinson. And I think Olsen actually beat Robinson. I think it was one of those fights that he did beat him. I have to take it back and look at it. But anyhow, he defeated Bobo Olsen, champion Hall of Famer. He defeated Harold Johnson, who was also a dangerous fighter, champion Hall of Famer. Joey Maxim, Nino Valdez, who was a very good fighter at the time. Jimmy Bourbon's Hall of Famer. Burt Lydell. I say Jimmy Bourbon. It's Jimmy Bivens. I'm sorry, it's Jimmy Bivens. Hall of Famer Burt Lydell. Misprint, y'all. Who's Black Murderers Row members as well. Clarence Henry, Hall of Famer. Oakland Billy Smith. Jack Chase. Homer Williams. Coco Kidd. Lloyd Marshall. Jack Chase. So yeah, Archie Moore himself was taking on some of the Black Murderers Row members as well, and he beat them. Then after he defeated Archie Moore, he also took a fight against Sam Barade. He defeated him and by stoppage KO. And this fight actually ended in a tragedy as well because Barade took some punishment in this fight. He took a pretty big a beating, and then when he had to be admitted to the hospital, and it was announced later that he died due to injuries. Fortunately, it's a very unfortunate situation when you're in a combative sport. It's a hurt business, as you call it. People are going to get hurt, but it's unfortunate that had happened. So, yeah. So, unfortunately, not say unfortunately. Then after the Serrano fight, he moves on. He fights the likes of Violent Kid Elmer Ray, who was also Black Murderers Row member, who was very feared because of his relentless power and body punching technique. Violent Kid Elmer Ray defeated the likes of Lee Scalvin, who was a former world champion, Jersey Joe Wolcott, champion Hall of Famer, and Obie Walker. And then he moved on to defeat Irv Solin, who defeated Phil Moscow, who also defeated Joey Maxim. He defeated Jimmy Bivens once again. And then he goes on to defeat Walter Hafer. He defeated Joe Bosky, who defeated Lo Scalvi, and Freddie Mills, who was also a world champion. He defeated Johnny Haynes. He goes on to face Joey Maxim again, beat him. And honestly, I think he completely shut out Maxim in their 5 fights. That he won all their 5 fights. And then he gets some. And then after the light heavyweight, I already discussed that Gus Lavovich didn't want no parts of Ezzard Charles at light heavyweight. So as Ezzard couldn't get a shot at Gus Lavovich, So he goes up and he challenges Jersey Joe Wilcott for the vacant NBA World Heavyweight title. It was called the National Boxing Association World Title, which is now the WBA World Title. Okay, he defeats Jersey Joe Walcott in that decision. Actually, it was a very, very tough and great fight. These guys were, Ezzard known to, he's very good at fighting from the back foot and keeping his distance with his long jab. And there were some moments in this fight when they were going toe to toe, and you know, Ezzard got the best. So it was a very close fight to score, but I think Ezzard had really control. He had the regenership, and there were just some moments in the fight that Jersey Joe couldn't really hit him. But he did go on to become the world heavyweight champion. And what's astonishing about this is that Ezzard was a world champion, and he was he's coming in and fights at 182, 183. He was literally a light heavyweight fighting for the world title, fighting heavyweight styles outweighing him by like 20 and 30 pounds. And Walcott, by this fight, if you look at the records, Ezzard came in that fight. He weighed in at 185 pounds, I believe. Yeah, well, actually, yeah, he came in at 183 pounds, and Walcott was 197. Wow. Okay, and then he defended his world heavyweight title against Gus Lavovich, who completely avoided him, and Lavovich was getting battered in this fight, and of course, his corner had stopped it because they didn't want to see him take any more punishment. Then he goes on to his second defense against Pat Valentino. He stops him. Then his third defense against Betty Bashor, and then his fourth defense is against Joe Louis. Yes, we all know Joe Louis. All right. Joe Louis had a very illustrious career, and someone universally recognized Joe Louis as the second greatest heavyweight of all time, okay? Right behind Muhammad Ali. Now, we all know who Joe Louis beat, right? He beat Jimmy Bivens, Hall of Famer. Jersey Joe Wilcott, Hall of Famer. Lee Savall, Billy Conn. Buddy Bear, who's the brother of Max Bear. Abe Simon, who defeated Jersey Joe Wilcott. John Henry Lewis, who was a very great fighter in his time, champion Hall of Famer, who defeated the ever-dangerous Violent Kid Elmer Ray. Tiger Jack Fox, Hall of Famer. He also defeated Maxie Rosenbaum, Hall of Famer, who defeated the likes of Mickey Walker and Tiger Jack Fox. Max Schmeling, Hall of Famer, even though he had that long loss at that time against Max Schmeling. Jimmy Braddock, who defeated Max Baer, champion Hall of Famer. And in fact, at that time, that fight between Jimmy Braddock and Max Baer was actually one of the biggest upsets in boxing history, given the fact that Max Baer was a much better fighter on skill level and on a pedigree. And Max Baer, he also defeated Joe Louis. He defeated Max Baer, who also defeated the likes of Max Schmeling, Primo Carnera, and Lois Scalvi, all Hall of Famers. Now, Primo Carnera, I gotta say, Primo Carnera, yes, he's in the Hall of Fame. I get that. But we all know Primo Carnera was a mob control paper champion in a way. Yes, he's in the Hall of Fame because he beat the likes of Tommy Loughran, who was a great light heavyweight Hall of Famer. He also defeated Jack Starkey to become the world champion, but all that. But other than that, the only time he did show some heart was in the fight against Max Baer. It was a very competitive fight. He showed a lot of heart, and Max Baer stopped him to reclaim the world title. So it is what it is on that. But hey, Primo Carnera is in the Hall of Fame. Wow. But needless to say, Joe Louis had a 12-year reign as world heavyweight champion with 25 successful or consecutive title defenses. Okay, which is the longest, which is the most defenses in heavyweight title history. I know Vladimir Klitschko was on the verge of breaking that record, but that got halted by Tyson Fury. And Ezzard, and this was a very competitive fight as well. And if you look at the weight disparity, Ezzard came in that fight around 185, and Joe Louis came in at 218. If you look at that fight, it looked like Ezzard was a goddamn middleweight in there against Joe Louis. He was so small. But there was sometimes in that fight he was able to hurt Louis, again, because he was able to carry his power, move from welterweight. But then again, he didn't gain much weight. I'm not welterweight. From middleweight up to he was fighting heavyweight. Again, he wasn't really fighting at 200. The most he ever weighed in a fight probably was around 190 going into fights. But other than that, he always stayed at the light heavyweight limit in today's standards, which is around what the limit is 175, but you can rehydrate as much as like most light heavyweights go up to as high as 190 or 185. But needless to say, that's what Ezzard did, and he masterclassed Lewis, ended his reign, and gave him his second loss in his career at that time. And Lewis had took a hiatus afterwards. So in his fifth defense, I forgot to mention, after the Lewis fight, Ezzard became the universally recognized world heavyweight champion. Okay, in his fifth defense, he defeats Nick Barone. In his sixth defense, he fights Louis Arma. In his seventh defense, he defeats Jersey Joe Wilcott. In his eighth defense, he defeats Joey Maxim. In his ninth defense, he loses his world title against Jersey Joe Wilcott. And, oh my God, very close fight again between the two. And this is their third fight. And Ezzard took the first two meetings. And I think I forgot to mention, in their second meeting, Ezzard put him down with a good left hook when Walcott was spinning out, was swinging a little bit wildly, and he caught him with a good left hook, and he won that fight by decision. But in this particular fight, there was no decision this time. Walcott stopped Ezzard. Completely flattened him with a devastating left hook, and Ezzard was gone. I think it was in the seventh round. And at that time, Walcott became the oldest world champion in history at that time at the age of 37 after 5 attempts. And, so he did that. So, after that fight, he went on to fight Rex Lane. He lost that fight, I believe. Did he lose that fight against Rex Lane? I know I got a typo here. I think he won that fight because, from my understanding, he went 3 for 3 against Rex Lane. I have to check. I have to think he did. Yeah, I was right. Yeah, he won that fight. He didn't lose against Rex Lane. In that first fight, it was a competitive fight, and what happened was he got he caught Rex Lane with a 1-2 with the left right with a 1-2 combo, and he flattened him badly. And Rex Lane, obviously, he was a promising contender at that time, and after that fight, he was never the same fighter after that. Then he went on to defeat Bernie Reynolds. He went on to defeat Jimmy Bivens, a Hall of Famer. He went on to defeat Frank Buford, a Hall of Famer. And he defeated Wes Boscom, a Hall of Famer. He defeated, they were never Hall of Famers. I'm sorry. Frank Buford was never a Hall of Famer. I'm sorry. Wes Boscom, he never was Hall of Famer. They defeated Tommy Harrison, Hall of Famer. He rematched Rex Lane, defeated him. Billy Gilliam, he defeated Larry Watson. And then he was on an 8-fight winning streak after he was on an 8-fight or 9-fight winning streak after he lost his title to Joe Wilcott. And then that came to a halt when he lost to Nino Valdez. And then he suffered his second consecutive loss against Harold Johnson, who was also a Black Murderers Row member. Harold Johnson was never a Black Murderers Row member. I don't know why I put that there. But he became a world champion, but he should be considered. But it is what it is. He defeated Coley Wallace, who was the last man to defeat Rocky Marciano in the amateurs. And then he defeated Bob Satterfield. And then he gets another world title shot against Rocky Marciano in the first fight. And this was a very, 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 this was a war. He hit Marciano with some powerful shots in this fight. And Marciano, we all know he was very known for his relentless pressure fighting style and his power, his clubbing left hooks and those right hooks and his body punching and whatnot. And Marciano had an incredible chin. So you would have to really throw 2 kitchen sinks to knock this guy out. And he hurt Charles. There was times in that fight that he stopped Charles in his tracks. And Ezzard was able to take those punches very well at that point. And then he started to get worn down. But it was a very close fight. And it went to 15 rounds. It was a split decision, I believe. And I believe that Charles won that fight. I'm sorry. I thought Charles won that fight because I thought he had the better work rate. He was, he was confusing Marciano to a degree based off his fighting style, whatnot. And Marciano, you know him, when he's in situations like that, he will find a way to, win, even though he lacked the technical skill opposed to his opponents. So, based off that first fight result, they had an immediate rematch, and Marciano completely stopped Ezzard. And Ezzard, after that, he wasn't the same fighter after that. Even though he had a 2-fight winning streak against Charlie Norquist, he defeated Vern Esco. He lost to Johnny Holman, defeated Johnny Holman in a rematch, defeated Paul Andrews, lost to Tommy Jackson twice, lost to Toxie Hall, defeated Toxie Hall in a rematch, defeated Bob Albright, lost to Young Jack Jackson, defeated Don Jasper, lost to Wayne Bastilla, defeated Bob Albright again in a rematch, lost to Pop McCarthy, lost to Harry Matthews, lost to Dick Richards, defeated John Harper, lost to Alfred Zani, lost to Donnie Fleeman, defeated Dave Ashley, and lost to George Logan to conclude his career. Actually, no. And lost to Alvin Green to conclude his career. Now, even though I didn't post this, but I have to say this. Ezzard Charles had averaged 5 Hall of Fame fights in each year in his 17-year career, as opposed to Ray Leonard, he only averaged less than 1 Hall of Fame fight in his career. And Leonard fought he had a pro career, 13 years, I believe. So, yeah. But looking at his final career summary, we already went through his amateur record. But Ezzard ended his pro career with 95 wins, 25 losses, and 1 draw, with 52 of those big wins coming away of knockout. He fought 5 men with losing records. Leonard did fight 2 men with losing records, so I have to give Leonard some credit for that. Ezzard, but this is a staggering number right here. Ezzard was involved in 27 Hall of Fame fights. 27 Hall of Fame fights. Wow. 27 of them. And defeated 9 Hall of Famers. Joe Louis, who some regard as the second greatest heavyweight of all time. Many, I should say. Joey Maxim. Jersey Joe Wilcott. Archie Moore. Charlie Burley, the dangerous and great Charlie Burley. Beat him twice. Lloyd Marshall. Jimmy Bivens. Gus Lavansky, who ducked him in light heavyweight, and Teddy Aris. It has 16 wins in Hall of Fame fights opposed to Leonard. Leonard, how many Leonard did he have? I think Leonard had, if I go back and check, Leonard had only 4 wins in Hall of Fame fights. Yeah, so Ezzard has 16 Hall of Fame wins fights compared to Leonard's 4. Defeated 7 world champions, though Leonard did defeat 8. Lewis, Maxim, Walcott, Moore, Lavansky, Yaris, and Krustavis. Now, mind you, Leonard, the reason why Leonard had the advantage over those world champions opposed to Ezzard Charles is that in that era, there was an alphabet era, and there were a lot more weight classes installed. There were never junior middleweight class, junior weight classes at that time. In the era of Ezzard Charles, there was no alphabet belts. There was only 1 champion, 1 division, and there was only 8 divisions at that time. Okay? So, Leonard, with all the opportunities that he had, and he was able to only get 8 world champions compared to Ezzard Charles 7, that's that's a very low output. Okay? And he's had more successful defenses than Leonard. He's had 8. He has 9 wins and title wins more than Leonard. Has 7 KOs. Now, altogether, Ezzard had 25 wins in world title fights and Hall of Fame fights combined compared to Leonard's 14. And he's the only Black Murderers World member to become the world champion. And this man became world heavyweight champion while he was being outweighed by most heavyweights like Joe Louis and Jersey Joe Wilcott by enormous weight. Wow, I mean, Jesus. And yes, he's one of only 2 fighters to go undefeated as an amateur, the other being Ricardo Lopez, the great Ricardo Lopez. Okay? Wow. That's a staggering number. 25 wins in world title fights and Hall of Fame fights combined. Has 8 successful defense. That's more than Leonard. I have to repeat myself. Leonard had only 5 successful defenses. Okay. Now, here's my thing about Sugar Ray Leonard that he's going to lose points for. And nobody, people don't tend to bring this up. When he came back in 87 and he beat Marvin Hagler, which is a very disputed decision, but I do still give him credit for that win to a degree. However, after that Hagler fight, he only had 4 fights after that. He rematched with Hearns, I believe. Yeah, he rematched with he fought Lalon after that, which was a fight that I can't really give him credit for. Okay, because that was a fight that he won the light heavyweight title at a catchweight well below the light heavyweight limit. Did defend the title, and then after that he fights Hearns in a rematch, which was a great fight by the way. And then he rematches with Duran right after that in '89, and didn't even fight in '90, and fought in '91. So he only had 4 pro fights after his comeback, and avoided all the opposition that I just listed in the first deck of this presentation, the first slide of this presentation, I should say. Actually, no, the first half of this presentation. All right, and for him to not defend his titles and to avoid opposition, refuse to defend against his mandatories, he's losing points for that. Okay. That cannot be matched compared to what Ezzard had to go through. A guy who was avoided in 2 weight classes at middleweight and light heavyweight. He had to go up to heavyweight to even get a shot at the title. And he was forced to fight men that outgunned him by reach, by power, maybe by not the only advantage that Ezzard did have was speed. And he had correlated speed with his power that he was able to carry going to heavyweight fights. Okay? And I bet you some of you didn't know that Ezzard was the guy to end Joe Louis's reign as a world heavyweight champion at that time. Well, other than Max Schmeling, but that 12-year reign, Ezzard was the guy to end Joe Louis's reign as a world champion, 12 years. Okay, and to me, and I know most of you may agree that in an era where there were no alphabet belts, in an era there weren't any junior weight classes, whatnot. Like for example, there was no light middleweights. That's between welterweight and middleweight. Ezzard was able to accomplish those things in a very, very adverse situation in a mob control era of boxing, and he was able to do that. While Leonard was able to get advantages, he was able to have privileges. Okay, I'm not saying he didn't have to work hard, but at the same time, he came in an era where he didn't have to go up against a mob control, where he was able to get favoritism, and he's able to choose who he wanted to fight. Ezzard had to go through wars. He had to go through monsters, and you've seen the names of lists that he fought, that he beat, that many people didn't know. You've seen it. So, okay, for a man who had to average at least 5 or 6 Hall of Fame fights in his pro career after his second year as a pro, as opposed to Leonard, who averaged less than 1 Hall of Fame pro fight in his career as a pro after his second year as a pro. To me, that's another astonishing number. Okay, so, and also I forgot to mention that Leonard also took fights at catchweights. He also had some world title fights at catchweight, which also loses points for me as well. While Ezzard had to fight in an era where there weren't any catchweights. So, in closing, Ezzard Charles is a much greater fighter than Sugar Ray Leonard. Based off the information I provided for you, based off the number of title fights that he's won, the number of Hall of Fame fights that he's won, the number of defenses that he has, and the extreme environment of adversity that he had to go through. And he was able to accomplish that. And it's sad that he's not even considered as a top 10 all-time great. To me, he's a top 10 all-time great based off of what I've seen right there. Maybe top 15 at best. Okay? And, people regard Ezzard Charles as the greatest light heavyweight of all time, even though he never won a title. But many people don't forget that Ezzard Charles is also rated one of the greatest heavyweights of all time in the top 10. Some would regard him there. And I even have him ranked higher than Evander Holyfield. As much as I like Evander, but Ezzard is greater than Evander. Anyhow, if you guys have a different opinion, please let me know in the comment section below. Other than that, I'm signing off. Peace.